Welcome to WhiskyCast, cask strength conversation featuring news and interviews from the world of whiskey. I'm Mark Gillespie. This is episode number 981 for December 4th, 2022. Coming up in a few minutes.
We have people putting forward money in the future to these bottles. It's going for a great cause for the charities up here and the local community.
6 years ago, we brought you the story of a pallet of peated malt that survived the worst wildfire in Canadian history, the fire that devastated thousands of acres of land around Fort McMurray, Alberta. The fire was nicknamed the Beast, and so was the whiskey that came from that pallet of malt. Futures sold back then raised more than $100,000 for charities around Fort McMurray, and this weekend the distillers returned to Fort Mac to deliver the first bottles of the Beast. I'll talk with Bryce, Parsons, and Spike Baker later on WhiskyCast In-Depth. We'll also have the What I'm Tasting This Week department, your voice, and much more, all on this week's WhiskyCast.
Hey friends, Gabriel Cardarella here with Dewar's Scotch Whiskey, and I can't wait to introduce you to the new Dewar's 12-year hitting shelves this holiday season. More a little later in this episode of WhiskyCast.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast. Happy holidays! On behalf of Redbreast, here's to you and yours. Eating well, enjoying a redbreast or two, and getting all snug and cosy on the couch. Reminds me of my own nest. Sure, there's no cushions or blankets, but I do have some very fancy decorative twigs, let me tell you. Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast. Redbreast. Pass it on.
Let's get started with the week's news. It's brought to you by the Dalmore. Lots of new whiskeys to talk about this week. We'll start with the Macallan, which released a 77-year-old single malt as part of its Red collection. It'll be available in, obviously, limited amounts at $87,000 a bottle. Also in limited amounts, this year's Parker's Heritage Collection bourbon from Heaven Hill. As Master Distiller Connor O'Driscoll told me this week, it continues the Parker's Collection tradition of innovation.
The difference between that and our Heritage Collection is, that tends to be more, ultra-aged bourbons. But Parker's were always trying to focus on innovation. So we delved deep into our library. We've got our library of 1.9 million barrels, and we had some really good 13-year-old and some really good 15-year-old, and we were trying to decide on, how do we present these in a Parker's way? Yes, it's really good whiskey that is absolutely worthy of being a Parker's, but what can we do that's innovative? And, some of the focus we've been, in our innovation team tastings, we've been, looking at different barrel finishes. That's where toasted barrel came from. And this idea came up, and we tested it, and we tried several different variations of it, and this mix that we came up with, we just tasted so good. We're like, okay, we're on to something here.
Explain the mix.
All righty. I'm going to have to read this because there's a lot of complicated math in here. So it's 2/3 13-year-old, and I guess a third 15-year-old. And then we took the 13-year-old, dumped it out of its original barrels, re-entered it into just regular new barrels, and aged it for a fairly short while, and then blended the two back together post-finishing on the 13-year-old, and that's what we came up with.
How hard is it to keep up with the legacy of Parker being year after year with these collections?
I won't say it's hard necessarily. I mean, it's definitely it's a high bar to get over. I mean, we want to, we always talk about honoring Parker with this, and that's really step one. Actually, I was in a Parker's tasting for Futures yesterday, and the question after every sample was, yeah, it's good, but is it good enough to be Parker's? So, there are really only so many levers you can pull. So how do we pull them in a way that we're not repeating ourselves? And of course, we're 16 editions into this now, and we have a pretty good pipeline behind it. So we haven't run out of ideas yet.
This, of course, has a legacy beyond Parker because of the money that it raises for the ALS Association.
For
right?
for sure, yeah, and that ripples out everywhere. So as you know, ALS, there's a proper name for that, but Lou Gehrig's disease, and that's what Parker died of. And a portion of the sale of every bottle goes to the ALS Foundation, and it's well over $1 million. I forget the exact number right now, but it is a significant amount of money that we've helped raise through this Parker's Heritage Collection release. And it's such a good thing to do, and it's such a feel good thing to do. And again, talk about honoring Parker. And as that ripples out, like our friends at the 5280 Whiskey Society in Denver, they have an annual fundraiser specifically for the ALS Foundation that has grown out of Parker's collection. They just had their auction, and it was tens of thousands of dollars that they raised. So there are groups out in the community doing stuff like that. So it's a really good ripple effect.
This year's Parker's Heritage Collection bourbon carries a list price of $175 a bottle. Meanwhile, the Dalmore is out with 2 new vintage expressions, the Vintage 2003 and Vintage 2007 single malts. Both were selected by whiskey maker Greg Glass and master distiller and blender Richard Patterson. The 2003 will have a recommended retail price of £350 a bottle, while the 2007 edition will be priced at £175 each. Both will be available worldwide. In other news, look for changes in the way whiskey and other alcoholic beverages are marketed and sold in Scotland soon. The Scottish government has opened a public consultation period on proposals that would end sponsorship of sports teams and events by alcohol brands, as well as put new restrictions on the way alcohol is advertised and sold in stores. The consultation period runs through March 9th of 2023. The goal is to reduce alcohol exposure to young people and those in recovery, as well as reduce the number of alcohol-related illnesses and deaths in Scotland. Finally, an update on our story last week about the legal fight brewing over proper number 12. As we reported last week, MMA fighter Artem Lobov is suing his former sparring partner, Conor McGregor, for a cut of the proceeds from last year's sale of the brand to Proximo Spirits. Lobov claims he came up with the idea for the Irish whiskey brand and suggested it to McGregor. Now McGregor has challenged Lobov to a fight. Online bookie Sports Betting AG has put the odds heavily in McGregor's favor. They did not put odds on the outcome of the lawsuit. You can keep up with the latest whiskey news all week long at whiskycast.com and on our social media timelines. The news is brought to you by the Dalmore.
Hello, Richard Patterson here, Master Distiller, Master Blender for the Dalmore. Whenever the team and I are in the world sharing our exceptional single malt, we like to keep in touch with Mark Gillespie and the latest news from WhiskyCast.
Time now for the WhiskyCast calendar of events brought to you by Catoctin Creek Distilling. Buffalo Trace Distillery's annual holiday light display will be open each night through January 1st in Frankfort, Kentucky, with visits from Santa Claus on Thursday night and Friday night this week. Maker's Mark Distillery in Loretto, Kentucky has special holiday tours on those nights as well, along with a mulled wine and wreath-making workshop on Saturday. McTeer's has its final whiskey auction of the year Friday in Glasgow, Scotland, and Whiskies of the World is this Saturday in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. The Victoria Whiskey Festival runs from January 19th through the 22nd in Victoria, British Columbia. I hope to see some of you there that weekend. And finally, if you're thinking about attending the 2023 Spirit of Speyside Festival, here are 2 dates to keep in mind. The schedule will be released on Wednesday, January 25th, and tickets will go on sale online on the 27th at noon GMT. Gift vouchers are available now through the festival's website. If you're organizing a whiskey event, please let us know about it. We'll add it to the calendar at whiskycast.com. The calendar is brought to you by Catoctin Creek Distilling, makers of the Virginia Rye Whiskey. You'll find their Roundstone Rye at fine whiskey shops in 26 U.S. states, 3 continents, and online. Visit the new BuyVirginiaRye.com site for more details, and please drink responsibly.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast. Not to throw shade on other holiday gifts, but gift cards, really? First, you can't pour, sip and share them. And second, they're so small that you can easily forget about them. Wait, do people say that about me? Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast. Redbreast. Pass it on.
WhiskyCast In-Depth is brought to you by Mortlock and the Classic Malts lineup. 6 years ago, a massive wildfire engulfed Northern Alberta. It was known as the Beast, and forced the evacuations of 88,000 people in and around Fort McMurray. At the time they had to evacuate, Spike Baker and his team at Buffalo Brewing and Distilling in Fort Mac had a pallet of peated malt outside. They had to leave it behind as they ran for their lives, but firefighters were able to save both the distillery and the malt. That malt later became a whiskey, and I interviewed Spike Baker in episode 613 of WhiskyCast from October of 2016. While Wood Buffalo closed its doors in 2019, the whiskey lives on today under the stewardship of Bear Hill, which owns brew pubs and a craft distillery around Alberta, and is building a new distillery in Jasper. Wood Buffalo pre-sold bottles of the Beast after the fire to raise money for local charities, and raised more than $100,000. Now, with the whiskey mature, Spike Baker and master distiller Bryce Parsons returned to Fort McMurray to fulfill the promise they made 6 years ago. First of all, let's go into the genesis of this whiskey to begin with, the 2016 Fort McMurray wildfire in Alberta that really devastated most of the northern half of the province, it seems like.
Yeah, at that time, actually, it was definitely, I think it devastated the northern half of the province, which is, if you look at, how Canada is populated, usually the northern half isn't as much populated, but it's vast amounts of land. And, of course, there is some significant communities. And Fort McMurray being one of the, main centers for oil and gas, it's a large economic driver for the economy of the province of Alberta, with a community of having roughly, I think there was about 88,000 people that were evacuated.
I don't remember specifically, but it was either the largest or one of the largest evacuations in North America ever at the time. I think there's been some other things since, but it was.
Yeah, I think there was. And at the time, too, it hit also the largest natural disaster in Canada's history. I think as far as dollar-wise, I think that recently got beat by the floods in British Columbia recently in the Lower Mainland there. But at the time, it was the biggest and most expensive natural disaster.
Now, one of the businesses that was saved by the work of firefighters was Wood Buffalo Brewing, where you worked, right, Spike?
That's right, yeah. And at the time, we actually didn't even think we were getting evacuated. We were still brewing, had an IPA going in the tank, was kind of preparing for people from other sections of town that were getting evacuated, getting some extra food on the go, that type of thing. And lo and behold, the fire was coming down the hill, so we had to get out of there. And I had a fresh pallet of Scottish peated malt sitting outside. Didn't have time to do anything with it. Just had to leave it there. And over the coming weeks, in discussions with Bryce, realized that might have been a good thing because we had left it out in the smoke.
I know you had it tested, and it came back as safe to work with, right?
That and it showed modification as well with the malt, despite it was peated. Baird's compared it to their regular peated malt that comes right out of their Baird's heavy peat that comes right out of their plant, and they confirmed that there is modification even in the aroma and flavor of this kind of dual smoked malt So actually, we saved some of the beast smoked malt, and we got some new Baird's Heavy Peat. And for the bottle release, actually, the holders get a little bag of each if they ever want to compare.
Now let's talk about the bottles, because it's been almost 6 years. It's been over 6 years now since you distilled it, and I know the original plan was to hold on to it for at least 5. I'm assuming the pandemic had something to do with the delays.
Yeah, there's kind of a bunch of stuff that has actually happened. Obviously, the pandemic being the most significant. I think with anything like this, one thing when you're selling futures in a bottle, there's obviously it's a promise, and I think that's an important thing regarding this story is that we had people putting forward money in the futures of these bottles. It's going for a great cause for the charities up here and the local community. However, though, it's entrusting us too to age a product to a respectable age. And in Canada, it's a minimum 3 years to call it whiskey, but that's still fairly young. And so we always looked at initially 5 years. However, though, what added that extra year is probably, definitely the pandemic, and, as well, the economic downturn in the economy that was happening at the same time led to us closing Wood Buffalo Brewing and Distilling in May 2019. So we didn't really have a distillery up here anymore, or a home. So there was some kind of movement of inventory and juggling of cash to, especially with this project, to ensure that we could continue aging it and keeping it, so we could do good on our promise to the people that bought the bottle.
And that brings us to the Malign Distillery. Explain what this distillery is, since it's brand new and still, I believe, under construction, right?
Yeah, the pronunciation is Malign.
Malign, I apologize.
Yeah, no problem. There's a bit of an intention with that name, similar to Scottish distilleries, where you might not get the pronunciation right off the bat. So there is a little bit of an intention there, but I think this goes back to, as well as the pandemic. I think has made us. Makes anyone kind of reflect on what they're doing at the time, and we're a very our company, so the larger company being Bear Hill Brewing, and we have brew pubs all over the province. We were hit hard by the pandemic, because a lot of our revenue comes from, obviously, our restaurant operation. Though we continued distilling whiskey throughout the pandemic, because we still felt it important to create whiskey inventory. You start looking at where, how your brands are communicated and built and presented to the world. And it was felt that Last Best, where we were distilling, we didn't have Fort McMurray anymore. Last Best was our other place we were distilling, that it was quite well known for beer at the time. And we had this opportunity to purchase a building within Jasper, and essentially for the purpose, or our intention is to create a distillery and whiskey experience. So what we're doing is taking the last 8 years of production of whiskey that we've been doing, and essentially the Malign is going to be the backstop for where that whiskey is going to be released, and it's going to be the brand associated, the experience center associated with that brand, just like we have other brewing brands that are associated with their own individual experience centers and restaurants as well. So, and then bringing it kind of having it in Jasper, Alberta, right in the Rocky Mountains, kind of brings a bit of a full circle with our company. We started in Jasper in 2005. And, for our founders, that Jasper is home. And it's actually where Spike lives right now. So it's kind of following him as well.
Let's get back to the whiskey for a moment. You've got a party today in Fort Mac to celebrate the release of this whiskey with I think 3 bottles that'll be auctioned off today.
That's right. Yeah, and we'll also be presenting all the bottle holders who have purchased one already. So to this point, we've been able to raise $117,000. It's been an average bottle price of around $3,800, and all that money is going towards the SPCA, the Boys and Girls Club Waypoints, who work with domestic abuse, the food bank, and the Center of Hope. And yeah, it's just been really neat to be able to do something positive for the community.
I think this goes back to a bit of that promise that we did 6 years ago. Despite we actively don't engage in having a brew pub up here or in the business community. However, though, we did make that promise, and we do, we do still, have a heart for this community as well. So, for us, I think it was just coming back up here and releasing the whiskey, where it was initially made, and giving the initial exposure to this community is what was important.
Now, will there be any bottles left over after all the futures are accounted for?
Yeah, there's some bottles left over, actually. We're going to carry some over towards when the Moline Distillery opens up in about a year from now. As we mentioned earlier, it is still in design phase, but we expect it to be open up in a year. And part of the opening celebration of that will be having the remaining bottles of the Beast there. And we'll probably be hosting an auction. We'll be hosting the auctions there, or in the retail space, there'll be displays of the Beast bottle that people could inquire about as well.
What does this mean to you guys to be able to fulfill this promise after 6 years?
It's tough to explain, honestly. We've been building, and we're happy it's here. It's a legacy project, and the whiskey is tasting great. We're really happy with the project, with the entire package that we were able to put together for the bottle holders. It's something.
Yeah, I think for me, I changed careers roughly about 12 years ago, and at the time growing up, there was no place to learn distilling, in this part of the world. So I changed, a fairly positive career in healthcare to get moved across the world to be educated at Heriot Watt in Edinburgh. And one of the sole reasons was to come back to this part of the world and start working on making wonderful whiskey here and building brands. And, I think it's still a very, despite there is a long tradition with what comes out of, large distilleries like Black Velvet or Alberta Distillers, we're still in our kind of second coming or bit of a renaissance in the craft movement here. We're still fairly young. And I think projects like this and being able to, bring forward not only a wonderful whiskey, but a wonderful story and, world's first as well. First whiskey totally influenced by a natural disaster. And I think is, sets off some wonderful initial first steps into what Alberta can do for the future.
Full disclosure, I talked with Spike and Bryce before Saturday night's celebration in Fort McMurray. They auctioned 3 bottles of the beast in addition to delivering all of those pre-sold bottles, and I'm still waiting for word on how much they raised with the auction. That's WhiskyCast In-Depth, brought to you by Mortlock, whiskey's best-kept secret. Hidden away for decades in some of the world's most famous Scotch whiskies, comes a single malt inspired by an original for a fortunate few. Discover the entire Mortlock lineup at malts.com. The What I'm Tasting This Week department is brought to you by Sagamore Spirit. Let's start with the Lot 40 Dark Oak Canadian whiskey that's finished in heavily charred casks. It's bottled at 48% ABV. The nose is full of caramel, dark chocolate, honey, and wood spices. Those spices take center stage on the palate, while touches of cherries, ripe fruits, caramel, and dark chocolate add balance and complexity. The finish is long and spicy, and I'm scoring the Lot 40 Dark Oak a 92. Knob Creek's oldest expression yet celebrates the brand's 30th anniversary this year. The Knob Creek 18-year-old is bottled at 50% ABV. The nose has touches of brown sugar, charred oak, caramel candy, and hints of spice. The taste builds up slowly with baking spices, honey, vanilla, charred oak, and a touch of red apples. The finish has lingering spices along with hints of tree fruits and dried flowers. I'm scoring the Knob Creek 18-year-old a 93. I'll have more tasting notes in just a minute, but first, our tasting notes are brought to you each week by Sagamore Spirit, a 100-time award-winning Maryland-style rye whiskey. With a determined focus to create the best rye whiskey imaginable, Sagamore's team of distillers crafts each spirit with a nod to both tradition and innovation. Find their signature Double Oak, Cask Strength, or Reserve Series rye whiskeys, as well as their line of premium rye whiskey canned cocktails, at a retailer near you. Visit sagamorespirit.com/find-rye. Please drink responsibly. Blue Run Spirits' latest release is the Blue Run Emerald Rye, distilled by the great Jim Rutledge at Castle and Key Distillery, under contract for Blue Run. It's bottled at 58.3% ABV. That makes it also the first cask-strength rye for Blue Run. The nose is sweet with hints of butterscotch, caramel, honey, brown sugar, and subtle touches of spices and chili peppers. The taste is a nice balance of spices and fruit, with chili peppers and black pepper balanced by honey, red apples, and peaches that fade to reveal clove and baking spices. The finish is long with those lingering spices and touches of leather, tobacco leaf, charred oak, and brown sugar for a very complex dram. I'm scoring the Blue Run Emerald Rye a 94. Finally, let's look at the Old Fitzgerald Bottled in Bond Fall 2022 release. It's a 19-year-old bourbon distilled in the fall of 2003, and of course it's bottled at 50% ABV. The nose reminds me of old leather-bound books, along with tobacco leaf, brown sugar, and tree fruits. The taste is elegant and rich with brown sugar, black pepper, cinnamon, honey, vanilla, tree fruits, and dried flowers. The finish is long and spicy with lingering hints of vanilla, honey, and dried fruits. I'm scoring the Old Fitzgerald Bottled in Bond Fall 2022 release from Heaven Hill a 95. The What I'm Tasting This Week department is brought to you by Sagamore Spirit. I'll be adding these tasting notes to our searchable list of more than 3,400 whiskeys from all over the world. Check it out this week at whiskycast.com.
Gabriel Cardarella again, here to tell you about the all-new Dewar's 12-year-old Scotch whiskey. Crafted by Dewar's 4-time IWSC Master Blender of the Year, Stephanie McLeod, the new Dewar's 12-year is now double-aged in first fill premium bourbon casks. It's full of red apples and peaches on the nose, hints of lemon zest and floral notes and subtle spice that'll expand into an incredibly lush, fruity character before you hit that long, creamy finish full of butterscotch and vanilla. It's no wonder that Mark and the good folks at WhiskyCast gave this whiskey a 94-point rating. Just what you'd expect from the world's most awarded blended Scotch whiskey, Dewar's.
Let's open up the inbox now for Your Voice, presented by Scarabus Isla Single Malt Scotch Whiskey. Hugh Cameron sent this pun-filled email after last week's story on the Jack Daniel's trademark lawsuit over the Bad Spaniels dog toy that's headed to the U.S. Supreme Court. Here's what he had to say, and hang on. Heard the comments on the recent podcast about Jack Daniel's being positively barking mad about the use of its trademark by a dog toy brand and have unleashed their lawyers on these mongrels. I do understand a company wanting to get license fees for any use, but exceptions for parody have been around a doggone long time, and I really hope Jack Daniel's isn't afraid that consumers will mistake a squeaky toy marketed as the old number 2 on your Tennessee carpet and 43% poo by volume and 100% smelly with their product. You'd have to be one sick puppy to not be able to tell the difference. Happy holidays. Thanks for all the puns in one email, Hugh, as well as a logical point about parody being a legitimate defense against trademark infringement. If you have something you'd like to share with whiskey lovers around the world, you can always find me on social media. Look for WhiskyCast on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, or just email us. The address is comments@whiskycast.com. Your Voice is presented by Scarabus, the Islay single malt from Hunter Lang & Company that celebrates all of Islay's natural gifts in one bottle. Only those who seek shall find Scarabus. Start your search today at hunterlang.com. Let's close out the show now with Behind the Label, our look at the history, science, and people who make whiskey unique. It's brought to you by Writer's Tears, and this time around we're going to look at the science aspect. You see, construction is underway now on the new Heaven Hill Springs Distillery in Bardstown, Kentucky, and when it opens, it'll be different from a lot of distilleries. They'll be fermenting their mash with live yeast cultures instead of dried yeast, but as master distiller Connor O'Driscoll told me this week, they'll still be using the same yeast culture that Parker Beam and his family used for generations.
Instead of using the dried version, we will use the live version of it. So we will, essentially we'll take the dried version and use that to start to initiate the live culture and just keep the live culture going from that.
Will that make a difference in fermentation? Will that give you more alcohol output? What's the difference? There's no one silver bullet, but the more you can do to make the yeast strain robust, the better off you are. So what live yeast gets you over dried yeast typically is a more robust fermentation. So that can minimize likelihoods of contamination, higher yields, better quality. Just because the yeast is more robust, its biochemistry is firing on all cylinders. Obviously the way we manage the dried yeast here, we're very focused on that as well. And clearly we're doing a lot of things right there. But that's one of the things I remind myself frequently, is that just because we're doing well now doesn't mean we can't do better tomorrow. The new distillery will have its own yeast lab, cooker, and storage system separate from the main mashing and distilling equipment. It's scheduled to go into production in 2024. If you have something you'd like us to look at on an upcoming episode, just use the contact form at whiskycast.com to get in touch with us. Behind the Label is brought to you by Writer's Tears.
Writer's Tears Copper Pot, an 18th century style of premium Irish whiskey, blended from single pot still and single malt. Like yourself, it's one of life's treasured rarities, and what's rare is wonderful. Writer's Tears Copper Pot.
That's all for this edition of WhiskyCast. You'll find links for the stories in this episode in our show notes at whiskycast.com. That's also where you'll find the latest news, my tasting notes, the calendar of events, the whiskey photo of the week, and, of course, a complete archive of all of our past episodes that goes all the way back to 2005. Get in touch with us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at WhiskyCast. The email address is comments@whiskycast.com.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
Ever go out drinking with a peacock? Always the same. Few too many, tail feathers come out, drinks get knocked over, bartender's not happy, night's over before it started. All I'm saying is, don't be the peacock in your group.
Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast. Redbreast. Pass it on.
Me again, Gabe with Dewar's, encouraging you to seek out the new Dewar's 12-year-old and experience it for yourself. Until next time, friends, we wish you all the best from everyone here at Dewar's, and please drink responsibly.
WhiskyCast is a production of Cask Strength Media, copyright 2022, and comes to you from the charming, yet regrettably dry town of Haddonfield, New Jersey. I'm Mark Gillespie, reminding you that when you drink, please drink responsibly. Thanks for listening.